was obsessed with Facebook and creating content. I wanted to take it to the next level, so I created this idea, the free condom campaign. I changed the artwork of the Facebook page, and I said, if anyone likes the Facebook page, you will get sent free contraception in the post. It took UNILAD from a couple of hundred likes to multiple thousands within a very short period of time.
What was the magic sauce for that? Alex Partridge founded media company UNILAD and then LADbible after starting 15 different businesses at university. Later, Alex was forced out of UNILAD, resulting in a life-shattering court case that took years to resolve.
I went to Brighton to meet these two people. They presented me with a bit of paper to sign. My intuition was screaming at me, telling me these two people are not on your side. I went home, this was a few weeks later, logged on to Facebook to do my normal updating of UNILAD, and I realised that I had lost administrative access to the Facebook page. Essentially, I'd been removed from the business.
That must have been deeply shocking.
It was a huge mental health battle for me that nearly cost me my life. I wanted to start a podcast, spent a small fortune on 7 cameras. 3 days later, I remember just sat there looking at all of these Amazon boxes and thinking, I don't want to do this podcast anymore. The producer looked at me and said, when did you get your ADHD diagnosis? So my goal was to balance the narrative around what it actually means to live with ADHD.
For young people who are thinking of starting a business, who may or may not be ADHD, what other key pieces of advice would you give?
This is really interesting, and it's genuine advice I wish I had years ago.
Welcome to All About Business with me, James Reed, the podcast that covers everything about business, management, and leadership. Every episode, I sit down with different guests who have bootstrapped companies, masterminded investment models, or built a business empire. They're leaders in their field, and they're here to give you top insights and actionable advice so that you can apply their ideas to your own career or business venture.
So Alex, thank you so much for coming to see me today. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I know your story and I'm very excited about you sharing it with our listeners. I'd like to begin by asking a sort of heads up question. You, I believe, were multimillionaire by the age of 25. How did that happen? Great start. Hit the ground running.
Let's get straight on with it.
So it started with lots of businesses that didn't work, and that started when I was 6. My first business was a board game company. Always been very creative, and I remember thinking I wanted to start a board game when I was 6 years old. I went through my parents' drawers and found all of the board games in the house, found all of the addresses of the companies that manufactured them, spent the summer designing my board game, all the little pieces, writing the instructions, packaged it all up and sent it to all of these companies. And I didn't hear anything for a few weeks, but I did get one response, and it was, and I think they could tell I was quite young. My handwriting was quite messy. They said, unfortunately, Alex, we're not looking for any new board game designs at the moment, but always lean into this entrepreneurial spirit.
So I think you get the prize, Alex, as being the youngest entrepreneur we've had on All About Business so far, starting at 6. I don't think anyone has topped that yet, which is really good. So by the time you got your mid-20s, you've been in business 20 years by the sound of things. You'd started a few other things after the board games.
There was a string of
talk me through some of those. And I'm really interested in how entrepreneurs get going, I suppose.
There was a lot of the sort of standard. There was a car washing business go around the streets that my parents lived on, knocking on doors. Loved that for a summer. My dad's an antiques dealer, and a lot of the stuff that he couldn't sell, I used to really enjoy organising, pricing up, and selling outside my parents' house when people were walking past. I started this website called Quick Presents.
Did anyone ask you where the furniture had come from when you were selling it outside the house?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. All the crap my dad can't sell.
That was very innovative. Yeah, go on. What was the next one?
So I think we're fast forwarding a bit here. But say when I was after college, this was when the internet was all over the place. I started a website called Quick Presents, and the idea was if you needed to buy a loved one or a friend a present but were struggling for ideas, you'd come to my website and you would input their interests. So you would say, dad, mum, likes fishing, likes musical theatre, whatever it is, and then my website would generate some gift suggestions. And I had a affiliation with Amazon, so that's sort of how it worked, very basic. But what all of these ideas had in common was there was a tremendous excitement in the early days. And I remember with every single one, it was the thought process on day one and day two and day three was the same. It was, this is my new life's purpose. This is the business that I'm going to do for the rest of my life. But with every single one, it didn't last. And fast forward 2 weeks, and it was the motivation and enthusiasm for every single one had evaporated. The biggest one really was in my first year of university. I had this idea. I wanted to create this late night pizza delivery company, because this was pre-Deliveroo, pre all of that, and I noticed that there was a clear demand for food after all of the clubs had shut. And I remember thinking, this is such a good idea. I impulsively spent half my student loan on this 6-foot massive giant freezer, nearly the size of this table. 2 delivery men carried it and delivered it into my bedroom. Ridiculous.
It must have filled most of the room. Like you in a freezer. Yeah, then what happened?
Well, I set up a Facebook page called Quick Pizza, filled it with frozen pizzas from the supermarket, from 4 different varieties: pepperoni, Hawaiian, plain, and another one. And I put my phone number on this Facebook page, and if students wanted a pizza in the middle of the night, they would text me. Long story short, I had 4 people cycling around Oxford in the middle of the night delivering pizzas.
You weren't going to sleep much, I imagine.
but I loved it so much. The university shut me down because I didn't have a food safety hygiene certificate.
That's a shame. We could have helped you with that, because we do those courses, but right. We're years too late, obviously. Yeah. They shut you down. They shut you down. So what I'm thinking, listening to these sort of ideas or examples, is you're ahead of your time on quite a few of them almost. I mean, you've come up with things that are, like Deliveroo's become mainstream, ordering things or AI will now help you find things for your loved ones if you put in their interests. I mean, you've had incredible creativity around those ideas. I did car washing. I remember, but that was for the Boy Scouts. It was Bob a Job Week. I remember doing that and earning quite a lot for them, but they got the money.
Well, I think it's all, it's all stuff that irritated me, and I just went into problem-solving mode. And I think out of a lot of my early creations, fair enough, I didn't necessarily stick at them, and we can probably go into why a little later on, but the very seed idea, the very early stage was things that irritated me, and how could I find a solution to those?
You went into problem-solving mode. I like that thought. We'll come back to that, because it was while you were at university that you started a business for which you became very well known, which was called UNILAD. Tell me about that, Alex.
Yeah, so UNILAD, I mean, this was back in 2010 when social media, particularly Facebook back then, was really dominating the university campuses across the country. It was so new, and I remember my brain just completely became obsessed with it, hyper-focused on the platform, what the algorithm wanted. I was in a relationship in my second year, and to cut a long sort of romantic story short, I got dumped, and she was the editor of an online university magazine. And the reason for the breakup was that we didn't have anything in common. And looking back now, really, I went into problem-solving mode, and I thought, what can I do to make her think that we do have something in common? So I didn't want to tread on her toes too much. Her online magazine was targeted at female students, so I thought I don't want to compete with her, so I'll start one directed at male students. So the name UNILAD came to me quite quickly. I remember running downstairs to my housemate's room, and he blew out this puff of marijuana smoke and said, "Yeah, it's a really cool name, man." So with a focus group of my flatmate,
that works.
The name UNILAD was stuck. And I think that was the brakes were off at that point. I was obsessed with Facebook and creating content and
so what was your first content? Can you remember?
I think it was, funnily enough, it was a review of the kebab shops in Oxford.
Right.
It was very much because I knew that people wanted late night food, so there was still a bit of an echo of the pizza business in my head, and I did a review system of the local kebab shops. I wanted to take it to the next level, so I created this idea that I now call it the free condom campaign, and it was I changed the artwork of the Facebook page, and I said, if anyone likes the Facebook page, you will get sent free contraception in the post. And I took the idea to the local clinic, the local NHS sexual health clinic, and they absolutely loved the idea to promote safe sex on campus. And they gave me these 2 industrial-sized boxes of condoms. And I think anyone who saw me walking home that day with these 2 boxes have no idea what they would have thought. But
did you still have the freezer in your room?
Well, yeah, I did.
Who did? So you've got to put them in there.
The excitement for that idea had gone. It probably is still there. But that campaign went incredibly viral. I didn't even have enough contraception to send out, but the snowball effect of that marketing campaign took hold, and it took UNILAD from a couple of hundred likes to multiple thousands within a very short period of time.
So going viral, and then you had to keep creating content. So I suppose you built a little team that was doing that with you.
Yeah, there was a team of about 6 of us, other students at Oxford Brookes University and other people remotely who were submitting content. And I remember I got an email from, funnily enough, it was a pizza company. It was one of the UK's largest pizza companies, and they offered me an amount of money to be promoted on the page. They saw the value in this concentration of university students. And I thought, well, if I somehow manage to stick at this degree and stay in Oxford for 3 years, the amount of money that I will get in a graduate job as a salary will be less than what this pizza company is offering me for this contract. And that was the validation that I needed. And I dropped out of university the next week and moved back in with my parents.
Were they pleased to see you at this point? Did they ask, what the hell are you doing?
Well, it was in hindsight, you can sort of say, well, that was a good decision. But if you
it looks like it from here. Well, what did it look like to them then?
Well, there was no precedent of success on social media. Facebook was very new. There was no case studies of creating a business on social media. So it was very... it was a very anxious time. I think they wanted me to get a degree, and I was abandoning that and sacrificing it for a Facebook page where there was no evidence that it would have any longevity or sustainability. The email from that pizza company with those zeros on the end of that figure did soften the blow a little bit. And
you showed it to them?
Yes, yeah. But my parents have always been incredibly supportive, and I think there was a degree of privilege I have to acknowledge there, where I was always encouraged to do what I thought was a good idea, and they didn't really give me any friction at that point. They trusted my decision to go all in on this Facebook page.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, I hope any parent with a potentially entrepreneurial offspring will listen to that and do the same. As a parent myself, I think that's good advice.
We're delighted that you're watching this episode. Please hit the subscribe button if you'd like to receive more insights and actionable advice that will help your business and or career.
So you had a Facebook page, but then it went beyond that, became a website. How did it evolve? What did you do from your parents' house to turn it into a business?
Well, I was getting lots of inbound requests from brands similar to that pizza company. My initial gut sort of knee-jerk reaction was to spread my risk and to create another one, because I didn't know if UNILAD was going to be safe. I didn't know how long Facebook pages were going to be around for. It made sense to spread my risk and not have all my eggs in one basket. So I created another page called LADbible. And because I had UNILAD on one screen, which by this stage had over 100,000 followers, LADbible was relatively easy to launch off of the back of it. LADbible, funnily enough, went super viral very early on. It got to over 1 million followers in the first month. And
what do you attribute that to? If someone listening wants to get to 1 million followers in a month, what's your advice? Hard to do, I think. But go on, what happened, do you think? What was the magic sauce for that?
Yeah, well, at the time, and here's the thing. At the time, it was because if you clicked on LADbible, it would take you to an article that you sort of read the first paragraph, and then it would fade out to nothing, and you had to like the page in order to see the rest. And the landing tab, so if someone clicked on LADbible...
Was that your idea?
That was my idea, yes. And someone would... The page that they would land on first was that. And the algorithm on Facebook at the time worked in a way where if you liked a page, all of your friends would be notified. So it would say, James and 7 of your other friends liked LADbible. So if you were to log on to Facebook as a user, you would see this notification that all of your friends were getting in on this other page, and it would create this, well, it did create this curiosity gap, this sort of sense of FOMO, which really snowballed LADbible incredibly fast. But I think the advice is, like, because that wouldn't work now, but what I was doing at the time, which is applicable to people now, is that I had a consistent culture in my head of testing the platforms and really analyzing what was working and what wasn't working. And that implies to people who are trying to build something on social media today, like, you have to have a culture of testing, because like many things, social media is not just a ever-changing landscape, it's a relentlessly ever-changing landscape. There's different platforms popping up. Each platform, Facebook now, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, they all have, and they make little changes all of the time behind the scenes towards what they're wanting to see on it, what content type they're favoring,
right?
What format, is it video, is it text, is it pictures, and not only that, but the length of these things, the formatting. So having that culture within you and constantly testing to see what works and wasn't, and what doesn't working, and adapting based on the results is the advice that I think is absolutely essential for anyone looking to build a following on social media today.
So really trying to sort of second guess the algorithms and test, try things, and really study it. I mean, that's what you said you were doing at the time when you were doing Facebook earlier, I noted. But that's a real important focus for people you're stressing.
Oh, it's, well, yeah, 100%. It is the, we can go into it later. It's why I think it's so perfect for my ADHD brain, because it is ever changing and it never gets stagnant, and it always allows the novelty to be front and center. Right. I love the testing and A/B testing and putting out 2 versions of different content. Now short form video is key to growth on social media across the board. Whether that's YouTube Shorts or TikTok or Instagram Reels, short form content is completely paramount and should be front of center in anyone's strategy. And then you have to look at the different elements of that short form content to see which bits can you test. And it's always the first 2 seconds that are the most important part of any bit of content. And we call it the hook.
2 seconds, the hook. So how would you test that? You'd put 2 different versions?
Yeah, two different ways to write the captions. There's loads of ways you can do it. 2 different first words are really important, because if you think how people consume social media content now, it's very different to how they consumed it back in 2010, 11. You were very much sat at a computer screen back then, sort of scrolling with a mouse. Now you're on a bus, sat on a sofa, scrolling up a news feed very
while
fast.
While you're watching TV.
With your finger. Exactly, yeah. So you've got a second. 2 seconds was really quite conservative. You've got really a second or less to grab someone's attention. So it's that first second you really have to put 80% of your effort into, and then testing that first second as much as you can with different sound effects, different facial expressions, different first words that the user hears, and really diving into the results of which first second portion generates the best clicks.
Right. And so you did that successfully with LADbible and UNILAD, I suppose, because they both grew, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean...
And then what happened? Yeah, what happened?
Well, going back to 2011, I had UNILAD on one screen, which was on about 300,000 likes, LADbible, which was on over 1 million, but in my head, UNILAD was very much my baby. I was very much more emotionally invested in that one. So I decided to sell LADbible at that stage. And that was all. I got approached by numerous people. I ended up selling it to Alexander Solomou, who still owns it now and has done a brilliant job at taking it from what it was in my bedroom to where it is now, which is a huge global business. And then my attention went back to UNILAD. and I continued to grow it, I can reflect now and see the overwhelm that happened at that stage, and trying to do too much on my own was causing me to not be as efficient as I wanted to be. Essentially, I needed help, and I put an advert out to bring in 2 people to help me. And I remember I went to Brighton to meet these 2 people, and they presented me with a bit of paper to sign. We were going to go into partnership and to all work together. And I remember that day, my intuition, my judge of character, the gut feeling, it was screaming at me, telling me these 2 people are not on your side. These 2 people do not have your best interests at heart. But there was something in me, I can now reflect, it was me being a massive people pleaser, me being terrified of confrontation, me not knowing how to say no, me not knowing how to assert boundaries. I signed the bit of paper.
May I ask, how old were you at the time?
That was when I was 21.
So you're very young. Right?
Yeah.
And were they older than you?
No, similar age.
They were similar age. Yeah. I think some of those confidences grow, in my experience, as I've got older. But you found, so you were looking for partners, and what they were going to invest in it and work with you, were they? And they presented you with a piece of paper rather than the other way around.
Yeah. And it was...
So what's the advice here? Don't sign anything. If you're listening and you're an entrepreneur, someone gives you a piece of paper without having it lawyered, is that
yeah. That's the obvious stuff, like if you've got a business that's generating any business, whether it's early stages or not, don't sign anything unless you get a legal pair of eyes to look over.
You're really sure with what it says.
Yeah.
But you did.
Make sure you understand. I didn't know.
You didn't sign it?
I did sign it.
Yeah. But you didn't get the lawyer's signature.
No.
So what happened after that? So you then, I imagine, rumbled along with these 2 new business partners.
Yeah, well, it was very. I went home. And this was a few weeks later. Logged on to Facebook to do my normal updating of UNILAD, and I had realised that I had lost administrative access to the Facebook page. Essentially, I had been removed from the business, which at that time was the Facebook page.
So that must have been deeply shocking. Well, this is a business you'd created, and then you couldn't get into it at all. Oh,
yeah, I remember the moment very vividly. Sat there in my desk in my parents' house and just not in disbelief.
And this was within weeks of you meeting these people?
It was very shortly afterwards, yes.
So your intuition was quickly proven to be correct. Yeah,
I mean, part of me knew straight away what had happened, because, again, it was that intuition piping up and saying, you were right. These 2 people are not on your side, but again, that the part of me that didn't want to believe it or avoid confronting it was telling me, well, maybe this is just a technical issue on Facebook, and go to bed. It'll be sorted in the morning. Facebook must have just locked everyone out of the pages, but of course, I woke up the following morning and that wasn't the case.
So what did you do?
Well, for a few months, I didn't do anything. I was in disbelief. I messaged the men, and I didn't hear anything. Eventually, I went to a solicitor, and the solicitor said to me that they're not. I presented the bit of paper I signed, and he said that they're not allowed to have done what they've done. All decisions have to be unanimous. It clearly says that in the partnership. But this is going to be a big fight if you want to pursue this. I did. He said to me that it trickled on for 2 years. It was letters back and forth at that stage. It was clearly no backing down. They were not.
What was their justification? What was their case, in a nutshell?
Essentially,
you didn't agree with it, obviously.
No. The partnership agreement was very clear cut. It was two partners cannot override a third. Everything has to be unanimous, and it was very clear. But
so I suppose the counter argument was there's a majority view or something. And
all decisions had to be unanimous. My solicitor said this is going to be won or lost in a courtroom, and you're going to have to take the witness box. You're going to have to give evidence. And my mind flashed back to the little version of me in a classroom when I was 7 years old. I had a panic attack in a classroom when I was 7 years old. I've always had this racing mind, this internalized hyperactivity. Describe it as having 10 highly caffeinated squirrels barreling around in there, and it has enabled me to be very creative and entrepreneurial in some settings, but in other settings, like a classroom, very anxious. And that day when I was 7, the teacher put me on the spot. All the other kids turned to look at me, and I remember my face went bright red, my heart rate sped up, ran out of the classroom, found someone in the corridor and said, "Please call an ambulance, I'm having a heart attack." When the paramedic arrived, they reassured me I wasn't having a heart attack, I was having my first anxiety attack. I've never been good with when I'm put on the spot. And when my solicitor said that this is going to be won or lost in a courtroom and you're going to have to take the witness box in front of their legal team, my legal team, the judge, the press will probably be there because UNILAD was quite a big name at this stage. My mind flashed back to the 7-year-old me in the classroom, and I went to a petrol station and bought a bottle of vodka. And I remember, I can only explain what happened next, and that's the nurse. I woke up in a hospital the following morning with a nurse looking over me, and she explained that 2 members of the public had found me in an alleyway clutching this bottle, and I tried to stagger away. I didn't want help, apparently. I hit my head on the wall. They called an ambulance. And as the nurse was telling me this, I remember this tremendous shame and embarrassment that came over me. And in that moment, to cure that feeling, I needed more alcohol. I remember thinking that. I stood up from the hospital bed, tried to run out of the ward. Security had been called. And before I knew it, I was in the back of a police car. And I looked out and I could see my parents. They had been called. And my mum and dad were looking at me through the window of this police car with this look of just fear and desperation in their eyes. They didn't know how to help me. That took me to AA, that experience. And I remember hearing those 4 letters, ADHD, in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, but it didn't go in. Fast forward 2 months, the trial happened in London. I took the witness box, and the judge was very accommodating. He let me take as many breaks as I wanted to.
It must have been very hard for you, though. That must have been really difficult.
I was cross-examined by...
You must have found that very challenging, given what you just said.
Well, very challenging. I was cross-examined for 6 days, full days. And even the judge said it was excessive.
By the other parties?
By the other parties.
Barrister.
Top barrister, who was relentless. But I took multiple breaks. I remember walking off anxiety attacks around the streets where the courthouse was, throwing up in the toilet, but I got through it.
6 days of cross-examination when this had happened to you, not you.
Yeah. And, we can go into but the judgment said later that it was unnecessary and the strategy was to try and traduce me in the eyes of the court. But...
so the judge said that?
The judge said that,
certainly sounds like that to me. There's some tactics involved. Yeah.
Fast forward 2 months later, after the trial had finished, I got through it, and my phone went, and it was my solicitor, and he said, "Alex, are you on your own?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You've won everything. You've won UNILAD back."
Well
and
done.
I remember just...
I'm pleased to hear it.
Falling to my knees, and it sounds quite theatrical, but I remember just bursting into tears because, yes, it was a 5-year legal battle, but really it was a huge mental health battle for me that nearly cost me my life.
It sounds very traumatic, but ultimately you were vindicated and your struggles were justified. And you got it all back, do you say? You got what you wanted.
I was fighting for my stake.
And you got all of it.
Yeah.
So then what did you do? Because I suppose you were back in partnership with the people you'd been in court with.
Yeah, well, it was a bit of a mess afterwards because I'd been out of the business for 5 years, essentially, I couldn't really go in at that stage and sort of say, I'm the boss now, or integrate. I didn't really want to as well. The company had grown so big and I had been out of it for so long, I kind of just wanted an exit at that stage, and I was advised to sell it. We put it, UNILAD, on the essentially open market. Lots of people bid for it. LADbible Group, funnily enough, bought it in the end, and I essentially took a chunk of money and drew a line in the sand.
So his sister company ended up being
Yeah.
the buyer. Well, that sounds like the completing the circle, closing the circle to me. And you walked away, hopefully, with a good pay packet. So sounds like it. So that was that whole UNILAD. And so how old are you at this point? Not very old, but 26, 27 or something?
Yeah, I was 28 or 29 at that stage, yes, yeah. So
what do you do when you've had a sort of career like that at 29? I mean, where do you go next is on my mind. Because, you've accomplished so much. You've had huge struggles as well. What's next for Alex at this point?
Well, I very much just needed a break afterwards, and I took a break. In my head, I'd very much thought, I was a bit, I got this huge amount of money. I was very much under the impression, well, I've retired now. I bought a nice car, I went on some holidays, but it was very quickly, I got tremendously bored.
Yes, I can imagine. I was thinking that myself. I'm sympathetic. Holidays are okay, but after a bit.
Yeah. It was, I think I'd been convinced by Instagram that was the definition of success, but it really wasn't, because in my head I ended up a bit boring. I ended up getting addicted to my Xbox, and I just went for 6 or 7 months without leaving my flat that much and playing my Xbox. And it was really hitting my self-esteem. So I wanted to start a podcast to do something next. And I had this identity that I was this businessman because of the LADbible and UNILAD success. So I started a business podcast called Walk Away Wiser. And I remember I had this idea, and I impulsively spent a small fortune on 7 cameras, similar to the ones here, dismantled my bedroom, dismantled my bed in my flat, and turned my bedroom into a soundproof studio, bought all of the foam, tripods, lighting, everything. It looked really cool.
No freezer at this time. I can see a pattern here, though.
Yeah.
Go on. So,
hired a producer, booked all of these guests, and 3 days later, the postman knocked on my door, and he delivered all of these boxes of camera equipment. And I remember just sat there looking at all of these Amazon boxes and thinking, I don't want to do this podcast anymore. I've lost interest in this podcast idea. And I didn't understand, the juxtaposition between the enthusiasm 3 days ago compared to now. And the person I hired to be the producer looked at me and said, when did you get your ADHD diagnosis? They recognized this boom and bust pattern before I did, even though I had experienced it so many times throughout my life.
That's what you call it, boom and bust pattern.
Yeah, quite literally, it's the boom in the early stage where it's like, this is my new life's purpose, buy the domain, design the logo, 3 days later, bust, your interest is gone. And that was the first time I really took those 4 letters seriously, ADHD, and I dived into what ADHD was, and I got assessed shortly afterwards, and I had the meeting with the psychologist, and she looked at me and said, your ADHD is clear as hell. So that was how I...
That's a diagnosis.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So you had this diagnosis. What did you do with it?
Well, I used it to be a lot kinder to myself immediately, because there was with these boom and bust cycles, this sort of glitchy dopamine system that is quite common with ADHD is very easy to, when something does come into your front and center, to get really excited by it and take steps to action something, whether that is buying the domain or even jumping into a new relationship, starting a job, starting a business, and then you lose interest in it. And what comes with that is a huge amount of shame, because even though there is some humor in it, when you're in that height, you tell people about it. You tell your family, you tell your friends, you tell people on social media. It's like, this is my new business idea, this is what I want to do. And then you lose interest in the idea, and you have to confront that person, because you'll meet them and they'll say, how's that new idea going? And you have to, again, say that I've lost interest in it. And you ghost people or you hide away. So there was loads of colour and context that I was adding to years and years and years of shame that actually alleviated a lot of the self-esteem issues that I was facing simultaneously.
But I suppose so you're confronting yourself too, or you're being kinder to yourself by recognising that. So that sounded quite a helpful moment for you. For me, as soon as I got the diagnosis, like many people do,
I dived into Google and I wanted to know, what is this thing I've been diagnosed with? Because I didn't know anything about it. And I Googled it, and it said ADHD is it's a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by traits of impulsivity, forgetfulness, and disorganization. It means you're going to struggle with disorganization, you're going to struggle with being late. It was all struggle, and more struggle. And it was enough to make anyone feel hopeless. And I reflected, and those things are there. But also, from my experience and speaking to so many people in the community who have ADHD is also creativity and pattern recognition and being great in a crisis, being able to zoom out and see the big picture and spot details that other people miss, being resilient, being a great judge of character, having heightened intuition, being very loyal, being entrepreneurial. People with an ADHD diagnosis, you're 4 times more likely to start your own business. All of these things, I think, are a tremendous asset to society. So my goal was to balance the narrative around what it actually means to live with ADHD.
Well, what you just said, I thought was incredibly inspiring. I mean, I was thinking of people I love who maybe have those characteristics, and how I'd like them to hear that because I thought it was very inspiring. And I think, I'm asking myself the question, what can we do to make sure more young people are supported rather than shamed in their journey through school and education, so that they become, fulfilled as the wonderful people they are? Because the description ADHD has a sort of mixed meaning, doesn't it? I mean, some of the words are quite sort of negative, as you said. And, neurodiversity is the sort of word that we hear more now. I don't know what you think of that. But how can we as parents or educators, teachers, how can we make sure we don't make that mistake and support people and help people constructively?
I had a guest on my podcast, an amazing woman who has an ADHD daughter, and she shared the story of how she, from a very young age, she gave her daughter a teddy bear, and the teddy bear had embroidered on its chest, it said, "Never too much." And I asked her what she meant by that, and she explained that it had 2 meanings. It firstly meant that it was a constant reminder to her daughter that her behaviour, she as a person, as a human being, was never too much. And secondary to that, it was to remind her daughter that anything the daughter wanted to come to her, the parent, about, whatever struggles, whatever worries, whatever concerns the daughter had, nothing was off the table, nothing was too much. I think so many ADHD kids, we know ADHD children, they're exposed to 20,000 more negative criticisms, more micro corrections. Stop fidgeting, calm down, stop doing that, stop biting your fingernails. 20,000 more than the neurotypical child throughout their childhood. It creates this intrinsic feeling of being different and broken and too much. So less of that, obviously. And in the classroom, movement breaks are so helpful. It's so important that the child in the classroom recognises and is reminded that if they don't connect with maths or history or science or whatever, it doesn't mean that they're broken or a failure.
You use the words in our discussion as obsessed with things, that you got addicted to things, impulsive, and these are all words I recognise, in my own life and career, and also, from people I've interviewed here in the podcast who've been, successful as entrepreneurs or pursued, very interesting careers. I mean, they are in some way. I don't know how you turn those. Sometimes they can be negative. How do you turn them into a positive? Something like addiction or impulsiveness. I mean, you've been quite clear about impulsiveness. It's about having a go, isn't it? And that's the starting point of any journey.
Well, yeah. I mean, the impulsivity and being a starter is a strength for the reasons that I mentioned, but it has to come with a massive side helping of self-awareness. Because it's not a strength if you're starting a new business every week because you're excited by an idea and then the boom and bust cycle happens, yes. And that's not a strength. No, you have to give it a bit more than a week. Yeah?
Yeah. So, I can see that. So how do you manage that? I mean, is it about getting people around you, or the self-awareness, about delegating as well? or finding people who compliment you? I'm thinking of working with my father,
right.
who's a great idea. I mean, your early career reminds me of his. It's starting all these ventures, and getting bored with them and doing another, and he's got ideas all the time. And I found myself sometimes curating the ideas, and we've worked well as a team for years. But it's an interesting struggle.
Impulsivity is great when it's aligned with self-awareness, and because when an idea comes into your front and center, into your now, into your present, and you're deciding whether to act on it or not, you have to have an awareness of yourself that will enable you to align or to understand whether that thing is a good fit for you, and therefore whether or not it's a good idea to take that first step, to buy the domain. So then you have to ask yourself, how can I build self-awareness? And I think there's three main ways that are really beneficial to building self-awareness. And they're not easy. Like, these are hard exercises to do, but I think they're so important. The first one is to really, at the end of the day, or as often as you can, or have time for, ask yourself some really honest questions. Like, what did I do today that made me happy? What did I do today that made me sad? What did I do today that I found easy? What did I do today that I struggled with? You know, you have to be really honest with yourself as well when you ask yourself these questions. And that will give you a foundation to help you build up this arsenal of self-awareness that will make you much better equipped to recognize if something is a good fit for you or not when an idea comes into your front and center. The second thing is to always listen to your knee-jerk reactions. So many people with ADHD, we've gone our entire lives pretending to be someone that we're not. So we don't often actually know who we are. What is us, and what's a coping mechanism? What's really Alex, and what's part of this mask that I've spent years applying?
Just going forward, you're doing a lot in this space now. I mean, you've got ADHD Chatter, the podcast going. You've just written a fabulous book, which is behind me, which I'll bring down. It's already been very positively reviewed. We'll put that on the film. You're in a sense starting a new career in a way. Is that right? Is that how it feels? Or because you said you'd retired, but then you didn't really like being retired. So what's next for you?
Well, it's very much the podcast now, and I started it very small. And I think it's great advice for anyone, ADHD or not, who's starting a business, is to really learn the basics before you learn the basics first. I started the podcast in my bedroom in my flat on Zoom. I did the first 20 episodes, learned the basics, how to ask questions, how to write questions, how to be a good podcast host. And I didn't overwhelm myself. I didn't get overstimulated. Once I was confident that my motivation was not going anywhere, I then scaled up. I moved into a studio in Battersea, hired a producer, really took it up a level. And the podcast is lots of episodes, lots of bricks that stack on top of each other over time to create this business. I think with starting a business, it's very easy to go all in at the beginning and just go a million miles an hour, try to do everything in a very short space of time, like I did with my first podcast, Walk Away Wiser. And suddenly, in no time at all, you're standing in the shadow of this massive brick wall, and you have no idea how all of the individual bricks work. And in that moment, it's no surprise that you get overwhelmed and you abandon it. So my advice for anyone listening is to really, whatever business that you are thinking of starting or have started, find the bricks within the business, really understand all of the different parts of your business and how they operate, and really try and break it up into manageable chunks to avoid the overwhelm that is actually, I think, the reason why so many ADHD entrepreneurs end up abandoning the business.
So one brick at a time, so to speak. So any other thoughts for sort of young people who are thinking of starting a business who may or may not be ADHD? I mean, I guess many won't know. Maybe not for many years or ever. But yeah, what other key pieces of advice that someone who's done it more than once would you give someone starting that journey?
Yeah, this is really interesting, and it's a genuine advice I wish I had years ago. It would have saved me so much shame. I think is you get an idea, and whether you're excited about it or not, like imagine you've got this metaphorical ideas shelf on the wall behind you, and something comes into your brain, and you think this is a brilliant idea. Don't action it immediately. Like put it on this metaphorical idea shelf, let it brew, and if you're still excited about it in 2 weeks' time, then that's probably a good indicator that the components of that idea is a good fit for you, and they are connected to your intrinsic self and motivations. And you need to do the self-awareness exercises to really understand what they are. But if it's still pulling on you in 2 weeks, then buy the domain, then design the logo. It's just about putting that breaker between the initial thought and actually starting the business. Because, it's so easy to impulsively jump into the business and start it without really understanding if it's a good fit or not. And if it's not, then you'll abandon it. And that comes with so much shame, self-esteem issues, comorbidities that can be avoided if you just put that breaker in place at the very start of the process. There's so many mini businesses within the main ADHD podcast business, so many problem-solving ideas. I think memory is a huge issue for me. I can put my washing machine on and it cleans the clothes, and then I will forget to empty the machine. The clothes go damp. I have to repeat the cycle. I can never remember to take my reusable shopping bags to the supermarket. I get parking fines and they double. So many little things like that, which, there's humour there, but there's also a lot of anxiety and shame because I'm 36. I should be able to remember to empty my washing machine. So I went into problem-solving mode, and I thought, well, I'll just create memory bracelets. I'll take advantage of my nighttime brain, which is so much more productive than my morning brain. I'll think, what 5 tasks do I need to do tomorrow? And I'll write them down on a bracelet. I'll wake up in the morning, put the bracelets on, clean the flat, pay that parking fine, book that guest. And as I complete each task, I take a bracelet off, put it in a bowl. And if I take all my bracelets off in one day, I reward myself with something. I gamify it.
Right.
Really basic stuff. So there's a product there which is in the pipeline. To create these memory bracelets. So there's businesses within the business that are solving problems within the community. So it's very much still part of my brain that's active.
Yeah, no, I can see that. That's fantastic, and I wish you continued success with that. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me today, Alex. I'd like to ask 2 questions at the end, which I ask of everyone. The first is, because we love Mondays here at Reed, what is it that gets you up on a Monday morning?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound a bit cheesy and maybe even cliche, but it's very much like when I open my eyes in the morning, I very much instantly see my why I started the podcast, why I started the business. And it's so many people with ADHD, particularly women and girls, have been let down for so long. It wasn't even recently the medical community realized women could have ADHD. There's this whole generation coming through that have just finally realized that there's a reason for their overwhelm, anxiety, racing thoughts, those highly caffeinated squirrels I mentioned earlier. So it's very much that. It's very much recognizing that 90% of my audience are women. It's huge numbers of people that are connecting with my content because it's finally making them feel seen. And that's what gets me out of bed. It's to continue that mission. I read my comments, I read my messages, life-saving is the feedback, life-changing. It's very much about keeping the why, the reason, the initial motivation. Whatever business everyone starts, there was an initial seed that was planted that grew, right? And it's so important. Some people lose touch of that, and that's often why people quit. But having that why, that seed, that initial excitement, that initial motivation front and center. So that's very much what gets me out of bed. It's waking up and thinking of that and realizing that there's a mission here to do.
Thank you. And the last question is a question from my interview book, which is one of the fateful 15, and it's, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
I see myself doing, if I'm honest, it's very much doing more of the same, just on a bigger scale. You know, I think ADHD is such a big topic. I'd love to interview Gabor Mate very much on my radar. Mel Robbins would very much like to interview. But just continue the mission. You know, really keep making the podcast, keep growing it, because so many people out there still think that they're broken. And obviously they're not. They're just different, and they've always been enough. So it's just continuing to grow my audience and keep as many people as possible reminded of that fact.
Thank you very much. Well, I wish you every success in that endeavour, and I've found it very inspiring and interesting to talk to you today, Alex. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.